Welcome back. So my series of creating oyster mushroom spawn in grain jars like this kind of blew up, which means a lot of people are coming to my channel asking more about the process. And I never really got around to, I have created some videos on this particular topic, but I had a specific request to do a new video. So we've gone ahead and created these spawn jars. It is well done. This birdseed is well digested and full of mycelium. And this is what I love about oyster mushroom, if you can see it. Focus. It's so aggressive, it's actually growing up the jar. Isn't that cool? So basically what we're going to do is, it was specifically requested that I show how you take this grain spawn and put it on a bulk substrate. So in this case, we're going to be growing this on chopped straw. So this is just straw that I've chopped up into, I don't know, about very small pieces, maybe a few centimeters, not huge. And the reason why you cut it short is so it'll stay relatively compact in the bags, and therefore the mycelium will easily be able to grow and populate it much, much quicker than if you left it big and there was a bunch of air gaps. So we don't want a ton of air gaps in our substrate. So I'm going to do an entire video about how we get this into this and what we do with this. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to put this aside for now. So again, this is our chopped straw. This is just straw you get at your local farmer exchange or wherever you buy straw in your local community. I've chopped it up, I've put it in here. We're going to fill it up with water just enough to cover the straw. I'm going to put something heavy on top to make sure that all the straw stays under the water, and we're going to put it on the stove. Now, they generally say that you pasteurize, you don't sterilize the straw. Sterilize would suggest that you have it at about 250 degrees for at least half an hour. That's the idea. The idea for sterilization is to kill everything, but that's not the purpose here. We want to pasteurize. And they usually say that is because you want some good bugs to remain on the straw. So you don't want to kill them all, you just want to kill the particularly nasty ones or weaken them so that the mycelium won't have a lot to compete against. That's what they generally say. So instead of going to boiling, we'll go to about 180 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes. But to be quite honest, I have basically boiled this and it was fine. So for about as long. So I don't think temperature matters as much as some people say. But for today, we're going to be aiming for around 180, 190 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. So I'm going to fill it up with water, get it on the stove right now, and we'll get right back to you. All right, so I got my straw covered in water, completely submerged. Notice that I'm using a cover that is just smaller than the actual inner diameter of the pot. And that's to hold the straw down under the water, because of course the straw wants to float because it's very light, so it'll want to float, but we want to keep it under the water so it will pasteurize. I have it set on about medium heat. I'll come back a little bit later and regularly check the temperature and see when it gets up to 180, because we're going to start the countdown of 45 minutes once it reaches about the 180 Fahrenheit degree mark. And we can adjust this as necessary. So I'm going to leave it as is. Now, I'm going to say right now, this is actually a relatively small batch. I've used gigantic lobster pots, if you've ever seen those, to do a lot of straw. But this is purely for illustration purposes. I don't even think this will be a full bag once it kind of boils down. But that's okay, because we'll just do a small little straw grow just to show you what's going on. And obviously, this hasn't warmed up yet because I'm touching it. Don't touch your pot when it's hot. Don't follow my example in that regard. So really, we're just going to leave it like this until it gets up to temperature. Then we're going to start the countdown. I will say that if you enjoy this video, I will do other substrates as well. We can also try growing the oyster mushrooms on coffee grounds, or I've also been successful in a combination of well-composted cow manure and coconut coir. But those high nitrogen substrates are a little bit more tricky, because the great thing about oyster mushrooms is it grows straight on a carbaceous, I don't know how you'd say that, but it grows on a pure carbon substrate without any nitrogen very well. And that's what makes them so easy to grow. And when there isn't a lot of nitrogen, it's far less likely that things will mold and far less likely that contaminants will be able to take hold. A lot of things can't compete without that burst of nitrogen for energy. It's part of the reason why mold often wins out in some particular substrates. So we'll try, but I'm more than happy to try those in the future. Those nitrogen-containing ones are probably ones that I'd actually first stick in the oven and actually heat up to properly sterilize. And of course I use the term sterilize loosely because it's of course not sterile. We're not in a lab. We're not keeping things perfectly clean, but just in terms of the temperatures and times, sterilization versus pasteurization. So I also want to comment on the water. The water is just my well water. It's nothing special. It's not deionized. It's not distilled. If you have tap water that may be chlorinated or have fluoride in it, I don't know if that will affect things. I've never dealt with that, but you're probably better off using distilled water or otherwise somehow dechlorinating your water. But that's something I can't really comment on, unfortunately, because I just have my good old well water, which is very, very healthy and good and relatively pure. But anyway, we're going to let this heat up. We're going to let it sit for 45 minutes, and then we'll come right back. So while we're waiting for our straw to heat up and pasteurize, I wanted to talk a little bit about mushroom bags, because this is something that, you know, I've kind of gone over before, but I never really talked in depth. So this is a mushroom bag. You might also see it listed as mycology bag or myco bag. And basically it's just a plastic bag with a little filter patch. See? This material has very, 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 very small holes in it that allows gas exchange, but is supposedly so small that mold spores cannot get through it. There's some doubt about that, but it seems to work pretty well for whatever's going on here. So I don't know the exact micron size of the holes, I will admit, but it's very small. So basically you open this up. I'm not going to open it up because right now it's clean. It's basically, quote unquote, perfectly clean. Maybe not truly perfectly lab-wise, but for our purposes it's clean. So I'm not going to open it up until we're ready to put the substrate in. But this is what the substrate's going to go into. So once the straw is pasteurized, I'm going to drain it, get the extra moisture out, and then I'm going to shove it all into this bag, let it cool down, and that's when we're going to put our spawn in here. We're going to close up the top tightly, and we'll do this in a moment. I just am going through real quick. Clothespin the top so nothing can get in. And the great thing about this, this patch is that gas exchange can still happen because mushrooms, they're kind of like an animal. You know, they need fresh oxygen and they output carbon dioxide. And that fresh air exchange is what triggers mushrooms to fruit. So to go from mycelium to mushrooms, you need that fresh air exchange because without that fresh air, the mushroom thinks it's not out in the open. So that mycelium is trying to grow to a top. It basically, if you think about in the wild, the mushrooms, all that mycelium in the dirt and in the leaf mold and everything else, it grows up to the surface. And once it reaches the surface, fresh air exchange happens, and that's when fruiting happens. So you need that fresh air exchange for fruiting to happen. So what's going to happen, or at least get the fruiting started, what's going to happen is we're going to, like I said, we're going to put a substrate in here, we're going to put this in here, we're going to close it up. There'll be a little bit of fresh air exchange. And then once the mycelium fills up the straw and takes that over, once it's reached the limits of the substrate, that's when the mycelium goes, ooh, okay, there's no more room to grow. Maybe it's time to start fruiting. Like we've done what we need to do here. And then we'll see if there's if they've accessed fresh air yet. And if they have, if there's enough fresh air in here, it'll be like, great, perfect. This is perfect fruiting conditions. Again, this holds in humidity too. That's why these bags are nice. And they'll start fruiting. And then you can either, some people open the bag every day to air it out to encourage the mushrooms to grow and properly fruit, because it'll start pinning, which is like little tiny pre-mushrooms. But to really get things fruiting and growing good, it needs lots of fresh air exchange, more than this patch can provide. So opening it up and fanning it, or some people cut holes in the bag so the mushrooms will grow out, because the mushrooms will grow wherever that most fresh air exchange is happening. So some people slit the bag so the mushrooms grow out the slit. Some people roll down the bag. And I don't know what we'll do. That will be a future video once the substrate is fully colonized. So I'm not sure what approach I'll take on that, I will admit, but we'll see when it happens. But I just want to explain that process because I don't know if I've ever really talked about the mushrooms and what triggers things to fruit, etc., etc. So again, humidity is a big thing. This will keep humidity in. Now, I will say that while we're talking about these bags, there are ways you can create your own reusable. These aren't really reusable, or at least, I mean, I suppose you could, but generally the philosophy is to just chuck them, which is kind of, you know, throwing away all that plastic. So people have created like reusable containers that have a filter patch, sometimes using the Tyvek here. And you can do that. I'm not going to get into that deeply in this video, because for now we're just going to play it safe and use a pre-made myco bag, mushroom bag, and call it good. But anyway, I'm going to go check the temperature on that straw and see where we're at. It's like making pasta. So I've taken the straw, I've drained it, poured it through the colander into the sink to get the majority of the liquid out. Now that our 45 minutes of pasteurization, 180 to 109 degrees Fahrenheit is over, I now have it just draining. And I keep it covered just to make sure nothing nasty comes and lands on top of it. And we're basically going to just let that sit there until it fully drains and it cools down a little bit, because we don't want it too wet or too hot when we put it into the bags. Wetness just creates an environment of nasty. Too wet creates a nasty environment for other things to be growing beyond our mushrooms. And if it's too hot, well, it's just difficult to work with. But either way, we'll get it into the bag and then we'll wait a little bit for it to cool down to a nice room or close to room temperature so we can add our spawn without killing the mycelium. Because if it's too hot, mycelium will die. So let's let that cool down and we'll get back to that in a little bit. All right, so we have drained our straw and it's nice and cool now. It's actually cool enough. It's cool to the touch. Well, it's warm to the touch, I should say. So that's definitely cool enough for us to handle to put into our mushroom bag, and also cool enough for us to put our spawn in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as part of all one step. So I'm trying to do this like from behind the camera, so it'll be a tad bit awkward. I apologize. So I'm going to start stuffing the bag. Okay, the straw's a little bit warm on the inside, so we may have to let it cool a little bit more. As I'm picking it up, I'm just squeezing it a little bit to test, to see how well drained it is. And to squeeze out any additional moisture that we really don't need. Again, some moisture is good, but a little goes a long way in mushroom. So it's one thing I learned with mushrooms. I always assumed tons of moisture, but too much moisture just invites bad stuff to take hold. So it's better to err on the side of a little dry. It includes all steps. That makes, in preparing the substrate, when doing the grain jars. Okay, so that's not too bad. So obviously you can fill this up a little bit more. I didn't do enough straw, but that's okay, because this is just a quick tutorial and a little test run. So I'm going to attempt to open this. Yeah, there we go. So let's open up and see what we got. Okay. Yeah, that looks pretty good. You can actually see some nodules starting to form, so it's really wanting to grow and do stuff. Now this is a butter knife that I've actually cleaned off with rubbing alcohol. And just left there, and I'm going to use this just to break up the grain. Oops. Well, that's not good. Not good to drop it on the floor. All right, so that's some nice spawn right there. So I'm going to take it, just going to test again. Yep, the bag feels cool enough, so I don't want to be killing anything. Just going to shake it in. Shake it, shake it, shake it. Use the knife. Make sure we get every little bit of grain. Every bit of grain has a little piece of mycelium attached to it. You want to get it all. No mycelium left behind. Okay, that looks amazing. Okay, so we'll just try to take a peek inside the bag. See what that looks like. So now here comes the fun part. You actually reach inside and you break up the little clumps even more. You're going to want to shake it around and really incorporate it as evenly as possible into your substrate. Now, the problem with straw is that a lot of the grain falls to the bottom of the bag. So I give it a good shake like this too. All right. I'm going to fold it up, being careful not to fold past the filter patch, because we need to keep that exposed so enough air can get in and out. There we go. That's literally all there is to it. So I'm going to let this sit in a room temperature place in the dark so that the mycelium will now start growing from the grain to the straw. And when it fully colonizes the straw, we're going to go into the state of fruiting. So I'll probably roll the bag down or cut a hole in the bag like I discussed before, but that will be a different video. So this video is just putting the grain spawn into the substrate, in this case straw. So there you go. Ideally this would be more full, but it is what it is. So that's all there is to it. It's really, really simple. Now it's just a waiting game like it always is with mushrooms. There's a lot of cleanliness, there's a lot of specific steps, but then there's also a lot of waiting, which is true of anything that grows, I suppose. So what else we're going to do is I'm just going to, off camera, I'm just going to date it. And I always like to, even though I only grow oyster mushrooms, I like to just denote that it is an oyster mushroom. Just good habit, good practice to develop. And that's all there is to it. So if you're new to my channel, please subscribe because you don't want to miss the next part of this when we actually fruit this. Assuming there's no contaminants, assuming this all works out. I mean, if it gets contaminated, then we're doomed. But hopefully it'll all work out. And we'll have another video in the future, so please be sure to subscribe if you're not subscribed to my channel. And give this video a thumbs up. I would appreciate that. It helps me out with YouTubey stuff. And that's pretty much it for this video. So if you have any questions, be sure to ask in the comments below. I know there's a lot to growing mushrooms, and I want to try to help people out. And if you want to see a specific video about something, please let me know. We'll probably do future videos too of growing the oyster mushrooms on different substrates like coffee grounds and coconut coir and all that kind of crazy stuff. So that's definitely a possibility. So anyway, love to hear your comments, feedback, anything down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for joining me on this journey.